You mute everyone, Shafiq.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I think everybody's muted now, so I won't ask for a response. Okay. Thank you again for coming over to the class. I think it's one of the last few classes, but my intention is to continue with the classes until further notice. So essentially, life goes on in this particular fashion until we start assembling at the U3A, in which case I suppose we'll be having a physical class there. Today I'm going to be talking about an issue which I think has slipped past a lot of our concerns. It was reminded by this Don Lonsdale, I think, when he spoke, when was asked, so what are the big issues that are still facing us other than the pandemic? And he said it's the conflict regarding waters, especially Egypt and Ethiopia. Because, you know, Ethiopia was not part of the agreement that took place between Egypt and Britain, which had given them a fair amount of control over the Nile waters. So we'll go into that a little bit more. But my general sort of feeling is that as the climate changes happen and the weather patterns change, water is becoming increasingly a commodity, which is going to be very, very valuable and absolutely necessary, of course. And we need to be thinking about it in a global sense of having agreements before the conflict comes about. We've seen now that our agenda is going to be this today. There are a number of conflicts that can potentially become really serious. And I just mentioned a couple over here, and I'm going to be treating in a bit more detail the Nile one, which is the most imminent one that is being discussed and having problems with. But other conflicts are also there, and in particular between India and Pakistan, because of the Indus River, originates in some of the Indian Kashmir territory, and of course in China as well, in the Ladakh area. So that could also be a fairly sort of important development in future. Now, the reason why rivers are so important, of course, is because it flows through some of the arid lands of the world where hardly any rainfall is there. Like in the case of Egypt, if it wasn't for the Nile, I don't think there would be any way that would survive the population over there. Salt desert, and so is Sudan. So the Nile is a very important part of a lot of those countries which are part of that river. Now, what I'd like to sort of also look at is to see whether the conflict that is going to be happening, let's just remind ourselves, this is about the region where all these rivers start from, if you look at that. And I'm not going to go into detail here in this class. We'll have to have another class for just this particular thing. There's Kashmir there, and there's China, and all these rivers, they're coming through all that. And if they build dams over there, then of course downstream we have problems, and that's why it becomes a hot war sooner or later if they don't resolve it. That's just another detailed picture of that. I'll cover that in another class. That's the same one. Okay, essentially summarizing what I've just said, so we won't go into that. Another sort of area of water importance is this Lake Chad. I don't know whether if any of you attended my lecture on that Lake Chad sort of evaporation that took place. Sorry. In 1963, it's about 10,000 or even bigger square kilometer lake in Chad started to evaporate, you see here. and all the water started to go. In 87, hardly any left, and this is 2013, and now we have even less. Now, what is the reason? One is, of course, evaporation. The other one is the feed that goes in there brings in the silt, and the silt gets accumulated, and then the water becomes shallow, and then the evaporation then takes the water away. See? So that's another sort of lecture that we could go into later on, and what the impact is, and how they're going to be resolving that. One of the solutions is, of course, to try and tap off the water from the Congo River, which has an enormous amount of water flowing out into the Atlantic. So if they just take about 3% of that water and through a canal, feed it into Chad, Lake Chad, then that whole region will become, again, livable, and a lot of people will not migrate, because millions of people have migrated because of that. And they've headed, in various countries, and they have become, a big problem for them. So here's a canal being built to tap off these rivers here. So that's another project actually which China says they would be able to sort of do, because they seem to have a lot of expertise in that area as well. Okay, so the main topic today is of Nile today. And this is the little area in Ethiopia that is causing a lot of concern, because what they're doing is they're building a huge dam there, and that dam is called the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is going to be quite huge and will in fact take off a lot of the water that is going from downstream, from Sudan and Egypt. And you can see the nervousness on the part of these two countries once that happens. Right now, the situation is that both of them asked for Trump to negotiate, to be, if you like, to facilitate this agreement. And they were there in January. I don't think they have made much progress though. So that's again one of those areas that Trump has fallen down on. I don't think there's going to be any agreement. And these people will have to sort it out. So if you look at this in the historical sense a little bit, here we have Egypt is now threatening war on Ethiopia. And that because they have, in fact, all their water comes from the Nile. So if that is affected, then all the agriculture, the industry, the populations will be dramatically affected. So that's a very, very crucial area for Egypt. And then, of course, we've got these separatists in Ethiopia causing instability down there. And of course, the agreements that were made, I'll just go into that a little bit later, they had withstood the time since the 1900s and so on. But now, because of population pressure and other needs, you have to, other countries are asserting themselves, and Ethiopia is one very much asserting on that front. Now, this I thought would be a useful thing to know. Here's your Cairo here. That's the river going down, right down there. And that's the Blue Nile. The Blue Nile goes into Lake Tana, which is in Ethiopia. And that brings in the most water into the Nile. And then the White Nile is this one that goes right up to Lake Victoria. See here. It's a beautiful sort of place. I've been to like waterfall, Victoria Falls as well. It's tremendous. And then these blue circles here are the dams that have been made in order to arrest some of the water, because a lot of water goes into the Mediterranean. The issue here, of course, is that the water is not even throughout the year. It's only during the rainfall season that lots and lots of water gets flown down, and then that's used for irrigation, and flooding actually is used like a a natural phenomena to irrigate the lands around the Nile. So people's livelihoods are very much connected to that. So the question is, if they build this dam in Ethiopia, it's going to make a lot of difference. Here, what we have is here, see, this is how much they use. Egypt uses 55 billion cubic meters, which is quite a lot. Sudan, 18, and all the others, 10. And of that, the Blue Nile provides 59%, and the other little tributary, they're called the Atabara, provides this, and the White Nile 20 or 38%, which comes from here. And there are a lot of projects that are very dependent on this water. And one of the main reasons why Ethiopia is talking about building a dam is that they want to store up a lot of water to create electricity, which is a good thing. But it's such a big program that they have that the electricity is more than what they need. So they can use the electricity for exporting to the neighboring countries. So it is good, clean energy type of thing and should be supported, provided they have the political will to be able to come to an agreement and be secure in the knowledge that nobody is going to backtrack on those agreements. So that's where the problem lies. Now we'll have to see whether that those agreements, the old ones, which the first one took place, I think, in 29, it was a colonial agreement, control of the entire. In fact, Egypt got most of the. I think I'll put that up here. If I can put that. Yeah. Okay. So the colonial agreement was control of the entire river to Egypt. And via 1959 Nile Water Treaty, Sudan also was included. So major dams were constructed over a period of time. And that agreement now is the one that is going to be talked about. I think there were several other interim agreements made, and we'll have to see whether the current agreement, which is still standing, does fulfill the requirements. Obviously not, and that's why they're talking in Washington at the moment. What happens if Ethiopia's dam builds this dam? This water then trickles down here, so both Egypt and Sudan are going to be in a mess. You can see why, and they're quite prepared to go to war on that. And these are the two guys here, the Sisi and there's the Ethiopian. They both want to say, well, we want to cooperate, we want to be able to, come to an agreement, and then, which is beneficial for both the countries. So we'll have to see how that works. Okay, I'm going to have to sort of push this aside again. Okay, what are the principles on which the agreement can be made? It has to be, I think it was done in 2015. And principles, of course, all very, very good to be able to look at these and say cooperation, development, regional integration, and sustainability, because all those countries are poor countries. And they eke out their living a lot of through agriculture. None of them are highly industrialized in any way. So they are very much part of the natural cycle that operates in those countries for sustainability. So it's a life and death sort of question for them. So all these very nice principles are there. It's just a matter of seeing whether there is trust, and that's what's lacking usually. Okay, here's another picture of Egypt, Sudan. Now you notice that these countries don't have their own river. It's that one single river that seems to sort of supply these enormous number of countries. And this Blue Nile here is the one which supplies most of, because this is the basin on which all the water gets collected, and the lake here, Tana, is the one that they are trying to build a sort of a dam here at this junction. Let's see now. Okay, 66% here of the water is taken by Egypt, 22 by Sudan, and the other ones just share on the other basis. Yeah, and these, fortunately, they have a lot of water. It's in the tropical area, but this is the desert area. Yeah. So the problem is the dam being built. Now, what happens is when you build a dam, the it it's it takes a lot of land around the basic the dam itself, because the water needs to be contained. The reservoir that is there spans several, kilometers wide, and it creates a huge lake, and it submerges a lot of villages and so on. This is the activity that is underway already. It's the biggest dam in Africa. So it is a massive undertaking. It's going to cost its estimates were about 5 billion to 6 billion, but I think the cost will be a lot more because they're going to produce a lot of hydroelectricity and supply to all the neighboring countries as well. Now, Egypt is frightened because they are saying the supply is already drying up because of climate problems and so on. And they have got huge masses of population dependent on it. This is the Nile River aerial shot here, and you see these fields. Now, these over the centuries have become silted with very, very fertile soil because the river sort of changes its course, slowly, and that's why this area, although there's no irrigation as such that they do, but they just depend a lot on the silt there and maybe a little bit of water when it floods in. They keep the water in the flooded areas of these banks. And then when the floods recede a little bit, then they plant it and then they harvest. So they depend very much on the natural way of doing things for thousands of years as they have been doing. Now, this thing is going to be huge. It's going to be 1,700 square kilometers, which I think is enormous. Now, this is just a few figures to keep our mind. How many people are there in this region? 280 million, their livelihoods. So the river actually supports so many people, livelihoods. And then you've got 11 countries down below as well here. The Ashwan Dam was the one that was built to try and make the water security for Egypt a bit. And the various stages by making it bigger and bigger over a period of time, but it's still very much there. You might even remember they had to move some of the Egyptian carvings and the old pyramid type of, not pyramids, but the, the relics around that. So the Renaissance Dam, which is at the border here of Sudan and Ethiopia, this is where the cause is. This is the source of the Blue Nile here. And the fear is that if they create a dam here, then there is going to be a huge amount of basin created here. And that basin is going to lead to a lot of evaporation, which means that the water then gets less downstream as it flows down. So water losses are going to increase if they build a dam. That's one of the arguments that they are putting forward. These are the ancient sort of Egyptian thing which had to be moved because of the Ashwan Dam. Yeah, there's the agriculture and dependent on the Nile there. The Nile is very close, very, very fertile banks over there. Now, this is an interesting thing here. If they do build the dam, it takes about 10 to 15 years to fill it up, the basin. And if they take 10 years to fill up that basin, then there's going to be this impact on the water supplies and on irrigation, on agriculture. So if Ethiopia fills the dam more quickly, say over 7 years, then this picture becomes even worse. You can see a lot of your agriculture will, third of it disappears. 1/3 of Egypt's farmland would be lost. See, and a lot less supply if it's done in 7 years. And if it is going to be done shorter period, 5, then half of Egypt's agricultural ability is going to disappear. And you can see with so many people in Egypt, I mean, whose livelihoods are on, on agriculture, they're going to be impacted dramatically. So now Ethiopia, on the other hand, wants to build it even faster than 5. And that's where the real conflict arises, because Egypt says we are going to sort of start a war. They'll probably bomb the dam, quite possibly if there's no agreement, because their whole economy and their people are dependent on that, as well as Sudan. Yeah, this is some say the things about use of force by Egypt. It should be underlined that no force could stop Ethiopia. Now, this is Ethiopia's position. They said, no, regardless of what Egypt thinks, we are going to go ahead and build the dam. If there is a need to go to war, we could get millions ready. So they are all getting geared up for that. That's why on Dateline, the question was raised by the diplomatic correspondent. This is a very real problem right now, and the two countries are gearing themselves up. So the first treaty was this that gave Egyptians a lot of say and control. But Ethiopia didn't sign that, you see. So they were not part of the agreement. So they say, since we are not part of the agreement, we have every right to build our dam in our own country. And that's why the conflict. See, for Sudan and Egypt, the Blue Nile could not be more important. It's, in fact, the whole livelihood is dependent on that. Depending on the time of the year, it accounts for more than 50 to 80% of all its water. I mean, it's a tremendously important resource, as you can see. So if that were stopped, 150 million people would lose their jobs. This is the estimate at the moment. Another 150 million would follow close behind after that, which means basically, the 280 million total population of that region is going to be completely and utterly sort of devoid of livelihood. So it's going to be drying out the land if they don't have enough water flowing through it. Look at this little rivulet, hardly any water there. And this is the state of affairs that's going to be following. And you can see how important it is in people's lives. And what would happen is that if people are affected to that extent, then the governments would fall, would collapse. Because no government can sort of provide for, everybody's livelihood. Now, flooding is a very important part of the agricultural methodology over there. They allow it to be flooded, the coastal areas to be all flooded by when the rain comes, and the Nile sort of really floods, and they bank these. They catch this water by having. Let me see, where is that? Lost my. Here we are. What they do is when when the banks overflow, they catch all this water, and they put little sort of structures so it stays there. And then once it sort of is completely used up, then they plant their agricultural crops in this region, and they harvest it, once the summer is over. So you have that sort of technique being used. Now I'm going to sort of go back to my, yeah, this is really the people's lives still, there's hardly any proper irrigation to be had or even any good canals being provided for. This is a lateral picture. You see the Nile is a lateral. So this is one of the few rivers that goes from south to north. It's one of the few ones in the world. A lot of them go from north to south. So it's an interesting sort of way of looking at it. There's your Blue Nile, and there's your White Nile, Victoria, draining. Most of Egypt's population is centered around here in the delta. All this is arid land, and a little bit of the banks are sort of populated. The same picture. This Khartoum, this capital of Sudan, is at the junction of these two rivers, the Blue Nile and the White Nile. So you can see it's tremendously vital for all these people to come to an agreement. The reason why they call it the Blue Nile and the White Nile is because of the type of clay that is found in that region that gives it that different color. Here are the countries that are surrounding the river. Egypt, Sudan, of course, Ethiopia. Then you've got Sudan, South Sudan, and all these here, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda. So they are also very much now affected, and they're trying to come to an agreement, because the original agreement was really between Egypt and Britain, and they had water sharing between these two, but none of these countries were involved. So they're asserting themselves a lot more now, and you can see the population is quite big, 390 million in 2019, and 100 million, over 100 million in Ethiopia alone, 100 million in Egypt, and the other countries are a bit less. Tanzania 58 here. But what is thing is, by 2030, the population will rise up to 500 million. So virtually, if you could say, an increase of another 50, 100, 50, 60%. And because these countries are all very much agricultural bound, water is the essence of their livelihood. The population growth here, this is what's happening as well. See, the world population growth is going to be of that type, but these countries are going to increase in their population. So that's why we are seeing such a huge increase in the population. This is sobering thought there. So you can see, if you look at these colors over here, that's all desert area. Then here a bit of greenery there. That's where the Nile takes its source water from, Victoria, Lake Victoria, and then all the basin around here. Yeah, this is the population density. You can see it's totally in there in the delta region. Very little along the river, and the rest of the area hardly anything. So this is the rainfall of Africa here. You can see plenty of water around here, except that there's not much of a infrastructure to harvest that water, and still, the investment hasn't been made enough. So these rivers are the natural infrastructure to provide for the water, in arid lands over here like that. That we saw. This is a view of the Aswan Dam. The Aswan Dam was built in 1902, opened there. It was very low, small, and then they kept on increasing the height and increasing the size of the basin here, so as to catch more and more water. So these were the lakes that got created here because of that dam. And you can see all this is desert. So what you need to do is after capturing the water, you need to be able to take it, build canals or something to try and open up the arid areas. Well, one of the things they had to, of course, do was to move these Abu Simbel temple. They had to transport it to another place higher up so that it didn't get drowned or got underwater. This is the canal that is also linking up from that lake to other regions and causing them to have a little bit more resource of water coming their way. The big lake after the base, the lake that got created because of the Ashwan Dam was named after Nasser. Was one of the very important presidents. Sadat was, of course, also president. That's why they named this canal there. This is the picture. They've got these lakes are quite big themselves, and have opened up the areas around them. Now, one of the things they're trying to do is, because all that Egypt has all this arid land down there, they're going to build these canals and open them up. And this has been, there on their drawing board for a while, since Mubarak's time or even before. And now Sisi, who's the president of Egypt, he's going to restart this construction. And this is the reason why water then becomes such an important thing for any country, and particularly for Egypt. And if Ethiopia sort of dams the water there right from the start, you can see the concerns of Egypt as well. Yeah, Sudan is also having a little bit of their own irrigation projects from early days. This is the big sort of irrigation scheme that they have. And Sudan, I think, is relatively better off because it's a bit further south, closer to the water sources. That's the irrigation scheme of Sudan. It's one of the largest in the world. So you can see with this aerial shot, it's quite big. This is the other sort of dam. These are the two dams which are doing the work along the river to open up all this area. So the country's productivity, in fact, increases manyfold. You see, the difference between agricultural economy and industrial economy, as you know, is that if you have a plot of land, say 10 acres, it produces 10 or a ton of crops. But if you have a factory, it can churn out 20 tons of their goods. So different resources used and different types of productivity between an agricultural economy and an industrial economy. Yeah, so this is the plant that they are thinking of making as just a scheme there. Because one of the good things about this hydroelectric is that it's clean energy. Another shot here of the dam's aerial shot. I'll just go through that. And of course, ultimately, this is the answer: desalination. Now, why is desalination still not a very popular thing? It's because it requires intensive investment. And apart from the investment, the energy that it uses is quite enormous. So it becomes an expensive proposition to get good water. But as we have seen, Mr. Musk is going to do something about it. And you might remember, we have always talked about Mr. Musk and his vision and his batteries that are going to solve the world's problems. And I think a lot of people are buying into that vision because, Tesla stock, I don't know if anybody follows the stock market, they have gone recently in the last few months from about $300 to $1,200 a share. So you can see there's a lot of buy-in for the ideas of Mr. Musk. Okay, that's all I've got to show, because I think one of the things we said was we don't want to make our talks too long, so that it gives us opportunity to have a little bit of a Q&A. I'll unmute everybody. Okay. So there you are. I'm sure that, yes, Mushtaq.
Yeah, I just wanted to understand, you talked about the Blue Nile and the White Nile, and the Blue Nile meets up to Khartoum. Why are the countries underneath, below where the conclusion of the two rivers is? Why are the countries below affected because of the dam?
Well, what happens when you build a big dam, you have to sort of stop the water flowing in order to.
But it'll only stop from the Blue Nile. What about the White Nile? Is still there, isn't it?
Yeah, the White Nile doesn't have so much water. It's only about a quarter or even less of the water of the total Nile. And the Blue Nile is the one which supplies most of the water. And therefore, the building a dam there is going to make for less water flowing downstream.
It's quite surprising, because Lake Tana is so small compared to Lake Victoria. Lake Victoria, which supplies the White Nile, is massive, whereas Lake Tana is just small and quite interesting.
The rainfall actually is the rainfall.
Because of the rainfall, yeah.
The rainfall that captures most of the water and that huge area of Ethiopia supplies the Blue Nile with lots of water. And whatever is left is in Taha, in that Lake Tana. So building of dams has got to be done with agreement as to how much losses we can sustain for evaporation, how much water can be released for production of electricity, how much water can be released so that Egypt doesn't suffer and these big populations downstream. So it's a pretty big question to resolve, and I'm not sure, they were at Washington, I think in January, as recently as that, to try and hammer out an agreement, but no agreement has been made as yet.
I'm kind of intrigued, Shafiq, why they thought that Trump and Washington was actually going to be, make a contribution to it. Because, I mean, I just can't see what the mindset is. Why? I mean, I can understand in desperation, you need to get someone to try and mediate to reach some sort of settlement. But, I mean, of all the people to turn to, I mean, Trump has got to be one of the last people who's got any interest in mediating in something like this.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what it is, but I think the fact that America still has a lot of muscle, they're hoping that they can beat somebody down to some agreement. That's basically, I think, the logic. I don't think they're looking for any leadership, except that, if somebody is strong enough to say, look, I'm going to give you $1 billion to keep your, arguments acceptable. So it's going to be a matter of having to carrot and a stick approach, which America is going to sort of be happy to do. Let's see whether he's going to be successful. I doubt it. But the people who are going to be pretty sort of influential are the Gulf states, who are very influential in Egypt and Saudi Arabia as well, in Sudan, and China, of course, because of the oil in South Sudan. So these powers, I think, are going to be quite influential in making sure that there's no war. That area is war-torn. Anyway, South Sudan is in arms and in such a poor state that I don't think they even have time to come and sit and talk on a table about the larger issues. They're just fighting it out. So what requires is, I think, just some carrot and a stick approach, which anybody can, if they are able to deliver, it should make a difference, I think. Yes, somebody else had their hand up. Yeah, Pam, I think you wanted something.
Yeah, well, basically, if this goes ahead, Egypt and the Sudan are finished. You know, they really are. I was watching an Egyptology program the other day, and Nubia, there'll be 90 villages lost in Nubia, and 500 archaeological sites will be underwater. You know, the whole history will be wiped out.
This is in Ethiopia, is it?
Yeah, no, in Ethiopia,
Yeah,
not Ethiopia, Sudan, in the Sudan, yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
So it's going to be tragic for that area, and I can't think that Egypt are going to sit down and take it. They need that they'll do something, and it just sounds awful.
Well, the sort of thing that I think they were going to be threatening is that if worse comes to worse, they'll probably bomb the reservoir. You know,
Oh my God.
the dam. That's the big threat of war.
Shafiq, I just want to come back on Pam's very important point, because when Lake Nasser was built down at Aswan, the entire population of the Nubians was totally destroyed, and that's something which doesn't really come up. Now, the Nubian civilization was very, very important. It's the other thing. The River Nile originally ran on the same meander as the Milky Way, which was why it was a very special river. And you've got the various pyramids along the bank of the River Nile, which are linked up to the star sign of Orion. You know, that's also been very well documented. But the other thing I wanted to bring up about water, something which is very rarely spoken about. I've been to Israel 3 times, and I've seen the River Jordan, and I've seen on one side, I've seen fertile lemons, I've seen grapefruits and oranges all growing, and that's on the Israeli side. And on the other side of the river, I've seen it like a dust bowl where the Palestinians are. And the River Nile, the River Jordan is another very important river, because a lot of the Palestinians depend on that, and the water's been taken away from them. So that's another reason. The Fertile Crescent has always been fought over, because it's the only place where there's water in the region. But the next wars could probably be about water. And I feel so sorry for the Palestinians, because you have to be there, you have to see it. You have to see it. Literally, on one side of the river, it's all wonderful and fertile, and you go to the other side, and the Palestinians are living in a dust bowl. And no one is prepared to raise their head and say what's really going on there, because you get called all sorts of names and everything else. So water is a very important thing. And I hope that the Palestinians don't end up the same way as the Nubians did.
Yeah, well, I mean, water has become such an important thing for all countries that the rich countries are actually investing in water resources in many parts of the world.
We've got a feedback.
Someone's got a radio on.
Or they've got two things on.
There's somebody that DRSB Sharif.
Yeah,
Yes, who's that?
What's that?
DRBS.
Sharif.
Yeah, let's just
Sharif.
Let's mute him.
Can we mute him?
Can we mute that DRSB Sharif? We don't know who he is.
Yeah, don't know it.
Well done. If you can, that's it.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah, that's stop.
Can I just say that I've seen some amazing programs from Israel about their desalination plants, and they're getting so much water, which they use a lot for all of their farming, for the people who are working their industries, and it takes very little manpower. A huge plant that I saw, there were only 3 people that needed to work there, and it's made the whole desert bloom there, as they say. South Africa was actually offering to help. Israel was offered to help South Africa with their drought problems 2 and 3 years ago. because they wanted to help, but South Africa
Shafiq, do it again. Mute him again. This Sharif, we don't know who he is. He shouldn't be on if we don't know him.
Yeah, I think.
Well, there's interference from him.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah, but we don't even know who he is. Is he a member or?
He might be somebody from Ethiopia listening in.
Yeah.
You can mute him and just ask him to leave.
No, I think I know the person. It's just that I think,
You have to mute him. Can you do it, him?
I'm muting him.
But interesting about the Israeli desalination, you need a lot of energy to desalinate seawater.
Yes.
You know, how you power that is quite interesting. You know, whether you use solar power or whether you need a lot of oil, or you know, it needs a lot of energy.
From what I remember, they were using a lot of solar power because, of course, they get very strong sun there.
Yeah.
Whether how much, I don't know, but they were using a lot of. They do all over the country. They use a massive amount of solar power.
Yeah, yeah, and that's got better and better, hasn't it, over the years.
Yeah, you see, it's so the way that we are headed as far as battery technology. That's the storage is the main issue at the moment, because we can create energy, and there's tons of energy about that. But the question is storage, and that's why, you know, our lectures on this Tesla and so on are so important, because they are way ahead in battery technology and storage, and they have in fact started to put together plans which are going to even supply the utilities, you know, through these battery sort of units. I think the future of battery and the storage is going to be so good that I think these desalination should be one sort of possibility. The other one is, in the interim, what they can do is utilize better techniques for irrigating their agriculture, you know, drip feeding and that type of thing. I think Israel was very advanced in those type of techniques. So a lot of water can be done. Even in India, I know there's a lot of shortage of water, and they're talking about harvesting water when it rains. You catch it in, you know, from the roof and put it into drums, and then use that for what sort of various things, and so on. So people are becoming much more conscious about utilizing water a bit better. It's a matter of seeing whether that battery technology is going to be coming in fast enough for us to utilize it for desalination. But that will be the ultimate answer.
What about looking at a different approach and trying, you know, when you said that there's this big build-up of silt, which is why they need to have this water, because the lake is evaporating. What can they do to prevent that build-up of silt?
Well, normally, if we, in our Thames as well, you have these, you know, boats.
The dredges.
Yeah.
Dredges, that's right. But in a way that the silt is a very important part for fertilizing the earth. You know, when I mentioned about Lake Chad,
yes,
silt, you see, they have to take the silt out in order to put the water back in, which is sufficiently deep that it doesn't evaporate. And that silt they can use, they're talking about building type of a border along the Sahara, south part of the Sahara, so as to make it a green thing and prevent the desert coming into more and more south.
yes.
That silt can be used there, you know, very usefully. That's one of the projects that that China is even also interested in doing. But again, it requires political will, because a lot of countries need to agree.
And here's China again, going to have control of the water. I mean, it is frightening. It's frightening.
Yeah, China has good influence in Africa, as I told you last time, from a very handful of few nations that supported it about 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Now, majority of them are behind China. So they can bring about some political agreements to bring about that type of infrastructure they need, because Africa needs huge amounts of infrastructure, and China is best placed to do that.
Yes.
Can I just ask Shafiq? I mean, I know you're very pro-China, and I'm not necessarily being anti-China, but do you not share any of the concerns? I mean, this is a new form of imperialism. Do you not share the concerns about what the implications are going to be for the world, with so many countries having so much, being so beholden
dependent on China? Yeah.
Yeah, my feeling is that because the unipolar world that we have seen of USA has not done it any good.
Oh, no, I'm not holding USA up as the paragon of virtue by any manner of means.
No, what I'm saying here is that you need to have a balance of power in the world. You can't just have one hegemon or whatever you call him, who calls the shots. And I think if China comes up, I think Europe is very much there, and I think USA is also going to be there, and India as well. So it'll be a bit more of a multipolar type to try and balance out one country becoming, all powerful.
Shafiq, again, we know that you are quite a supporter of China, obviously, because of its successes. But I think the politics is getting quite dangerous, because they're beginning to get, by the sounds of it, almost quite aggressive. So, they, as far as the islands in the Pacific are concerned, the Japanese ones, that they are, flexing their arm about that, about Taiwan, about Hong Kong, and then
also against aggression against India.
And against India, and also with the Hong Kong issue. I'm surprised that they are always threatening, and I just heard on the news that their ambassador to the UK was very sort of threatening about the fact that if we don't go with Huawei, that we will pay for it. What are they talking about? It just sounds to me like they're ready to take over the world, and anyone who comes in their way, they're not going to deal with diplomatically anymore. It's, they know where they're going, and no one's going to stop them.
Yeah, well, one thing that we are seeing is that they have made a tremendous amount of progress in their own country, acquired the necessary skills to try and offer those skills and expertise to other countries to try and uplift them as well. Their model is quite different to the ones that we are pursuing here, which is liberal democracy and has freedoms of all sorts, whereas their priorities are one of trying to make some sort of improvements on the economic circumstances, because they've been a poor country for centuries now. And as such, they had been exploited to a large extent as well. So I think the game is changing now. And I think the press is very much anti-China over here. That the media does sort of pick up on issues. Of course, it should, but all the good things it doesn't sort of put out. It's the same story that we have with Europe. You see, Europe was a good thing for Britain, but nobody talked about how good the European sort of get together or the union was, with the result that when Brexit came along, people said, well, there are the people who are calling the shots in Brussels and we don't have a say. So this negativity that gets presented in the press doesn't serve UK well. And I think I'm seeing the same sort of narrative of negativity against China, whereas I think we could be friends with China. And I think there's a lot of scope to be had by being part of this type of vision that they have. Their vision is of uplifting the whole of the poor countries of the world, in Africa to begin with. And of course, in China, they have already done quite a bit. And then Central Asian republics are all very poor. So that sort of narrative, I think, does resonate, I think.
And I'm heartened by your view of a benign China, because personally, I don't see it. And I actually think when globalization started and the West was busy sending all its manufacture to China, everyone was being as helpful as they could, and it helped raise millions of Chinese people out of poverty. So as they emerge from that as one of the most powerful and richest countries, they're not exactly being cooperative. They are now sort of being quite menacing, I would say. I was reading that in 1989, Chinese economy was the same as Spain's. It was that small, and now, of course, they're number 2, as we know. But I think even in Africa, wherever they're helping with infrastructure, they've got another agenda. And you may be right about what journalists are saying, but you can't help but notice it.
Yes, can I say something on this point?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. Like, it's for me, the worst tragedy that ever happened in my lifetime was when the Berlin Wall came down. If you speak to people from Eastern Europe or people of my age, they will all tell you to a person that things were better when they had the two evils balancing itself out in the world. You had the Soviet system and the American system. And I think that what is being displayed on us today is we're being whipped up into a paranoia about China. And it's very clever. Like the West is pushing everything onto China, you know, the virus, everything. It's all China, China, China. In the meantime, they're getting on with their own dirty business, which we don't know about, you know. And I think it's very dangerous for people to be fooled again, fooled again by this rhetoric that the press put out, by the politicians put out, by what Trump puts out. It's about China, right? They are trying to manipulate us into being aggressive against another nation.
Yeah,
but hang on, but wasn't, you know, as far back as, and that wasn't very long ago, when we had the coalition government, George Osborne and so on, they were promoting China everywhere. Yes, so you know, that wasn't exactly being the politicians telling us. So it's, and The Economist, which has always been an economics magazine, and it's always looking at the pros of China, like you, Ashafik. But you know, even that has sort of started saying, no, they're going everywhere and they are sounding a little bit dangerous.
It's all part of the game.
No, what game? But in the past, you know,
it's part of the game that they play. We're the mugs in this because we go along with their game. You know, it's like the virus thing. We're all going along with it. We're all terrified. Now we're all terrified of China. You know, last year it was the Muslim terrorists. You know, then it was somebody else. You know, then it was black gangs. You know, now it's the big fish. It's China. You know, so
George, can I just say? I mean, yeah, I do understand. I accept your point that the media does exaggerate things and blow it up, and we want to find a bogeyman. But I mean, all these things are real dangers, and I think I think a responsible society has got to face those dangers, and it needs to be a balanced debate. But we can't ignore it. We can't ignore terrorism. We can't ignore China.
But they create terrorism themselves. They create Al Qaeda. They create the Taliban. You know, like in the 1970s, they infiltrated the IRA. They were putting bombs there to blame the IRA. Listen, we've been so manipulated that it's unbelievable.
You see, I think we need to ask the question, which is a bit more fundamental, which is, you know, the post-World War new order that was created with the institutions, the World Bank, IMF, and so on. So that and the multilateral WHO and the WTO, those were supposed to deliver to a much more equitable world and have justice, in fact, overseeing the operations of these big corporations and so on. Now, where the thing has fallen down is that we haven't seen that type of thing play out. The strong have got stronger, and they're keeping the weak out of the picture. And they had kept even China out of the International Space Station, for instance, deliberately not including it. So we have alternative approaches now being adopted, which is to try and get closer to types of notions of justice that can be recognized by not only the big corporations, but by governments themselves. At the moment, you know, it's a consumer-led quarterly reports of corporation that is calling the shots. And this pandemic, in a way, has opened up the eyes of many to say simply that we need to have a much more cooperative approach and be able to bring in the justice, the racist type of protests that are going on. I mean, that has been highlighted again because justice is not there, because underlying all these issues is this notion of justice. And that's why I feel it's an important thing to put it like that and see how it goes. Yeah, Demi.
Sorry, Shafiq. Yes, I was just going to say two things. So one is, you say that, you know, in the past it hasn't been equality, and we've kept, you know, certain countries out of progressing, which doesn't apply to China because they actually did benefit from globalization and raised millions of people out of poverty. So, and they've become very strong, which is obviously, you know, in economic terms, it's a great thing. But I don't think they're, you know, they're not doing it on the same basis as the previous world order. You know, we don't have a new world order at the moment, thanks to Trump, because no one is really behaving themselves. So I think it's a little bit scary. And then, you know, China will go for Taiwan, no doubt, pretty soon. And no one's really going to be able to say anything to them unless it's a massive conflict between China and America.
Well, you see, what China has done historically speaking as well, going back centuries, I don't think their empire has been worldwide. They have been much more local in many ways.
Yes.
You know, so they don't have grand designs of territorial ambitions. But I think economic influence, I think they certainly would like to work along. This globalization, when it happened, it didn't happen to help China. It happened because it wanted to reduce the cost for the supply chains of the corporate world.
Sure, but it, yeah, but absolutely, but it is, that was the idea. For sure, and that's why, you know, all the politicians were promoting it, which was a good thing. But whether it's actually been limited to that, and the other thing you said about equality, you know, Black Lives Matter and all the rest of it, we're being, in a way, so much attention now has to be paid to those things. We're so busy fighting our internal wars, whilst China is still on track to carry on and become stronger and produce and all the rest of it. That we're not even fighting on an equal basis anymore. You know, they don't care about the Uyghurs or whatever. They just shut them up, you know. They're happy to kill people off or whatever it is, whereas the Western world hasn't been prepared to do that. So,
guys, can you forgive me? I'm going to have to go. It's nearly 1:15 and I'm going to be late, so forgive me.
Yeah.
And I'll see you next week.
Bye, Rod.
I need to go as well. I need to go as well, Shafiq. I need to go as well.
Those who wish to go do, we just complete.
Yeah, okay, thanks. See you all. See you, bye-bye. Bye.
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 bye, thank you, Shafiq.
By all means, you know, leave, and we can at least have one question that you're putting up on, and that is the assumption that China is going to be an evil empire. I don't feel that is so. They are much more goal-oriented to try and achieve certain goals. And I think that needs to be understood in the way that at least they have accomplished a lot in delivering what they set out to do. That's why I hope that this goal-oriented approach may bring about some justice as well to the poor people all over the world. That's my take on their becoming stronger. And I think right now, you see, we talked about morality, you remember, in our last lecture.
I'm going to have to leave, Shafiq. Sorry, I've got someone at the door.
Okay, Dan.
Okay, see you all next week. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye. And that is a thing that we are struggling still with, because the majoritarian government can't deliver on that front unless the people themselves feel this notion of justice for their fellow beings. which is happening the other way in the Western, where the swing is to the right more and more in many countries.
That's right. Sorry, Shafiq, but you see, the thing that concerns me there is that you're absolutely right. But I always look at the African countries, which I think I must have said in the past. Africa as a continent has so many natural resources, but because their politics is such a mess that, they never get out of the mess they're in, because their politicians come in and then they never want to leave. Which is obviously a risky thing to happen. And I think we can only help poor people in the entire world if all the countries are doing their best. And of course, they just don't do it. So, I'd be interested in your view on Africa, because I find it really upsetting almost that a continent which should really be a very successful one just isn't. And they go from crisis to crisis, because who are the leaders who are running it?
I do agree with you. I'm very upset by all of that as well, because I'm actually from South Africa. And I'm just seeing more and more the Chinese are taking over everywhere, because they say that they're going to help. They provide financial assistance and perhaps manpower. And then of course, the countries can't pay them back because, as you say, they're in such a mess because the money's been embezzled. And then the Chinese companies say, okay, well then they take them over. I cannot believe how much China is in South Africa, and north of that, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and all the other countries in Africa. I'm quite horrified by it.
Well, one of the things that I sort of look at Africa is, to begin with, it's a land full of resources. That's the way that the whole world looks at it. And secondly, I think it has a population, the demographic is in favor. We have a lot of young people there. So a lot of companies are attracted to go there. And then what they need at the moment is infrastructure. And China is providing them with that sort of infrastructure which they need desperately, because without infrastructure, they can't really make much headway. Now, whether that's affordable or not to individual countries, which Giselle is saying that, they become, debt ridden and so on, it's a matter of how the thing is structured, the program. Because I know the port in Colombo that was built by the Chinese, the Ceylonese couldn't afford it, so China has said we'll operate it for the next 50 years or whatever. So those types of conditions need to be looked at, from seeing what happens in the event that the expected results of this infrastructure are not delivered. Now, China is not out there, I don't think, just to give money away and so on like that. They need to be able to say, okay, we're going to make an investment, infrastructure, use the infrastructure well, and then it's a win-win for both. But if people are misusing it, or some people take it some other way, then of course it doesn't work. So that's why I'm saying this, even this BRI project, the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a grand narrative, the only grand narrative that we have in the world to try and in fact improve the poor people of the world. Against that, the only thing that we have are the World Bank and the IMF, who've got endless amount of conditions which they put in for the local countries, which then really take, that money gets stolen basically, and ends up again in Swiss banks and so on. So that old model is not working very well. That's my point I'm trying to make. And I think what China is offering is a newer model. And I think they are making headway, and I think progress is being made, I think.
Shafiq, I mean, the BRI, of course, is giving China much more power. And as they go through Pakistan and again, influence it with basically in one way, bribing it, but as you say, improving the infrastructure. But then, of course, India, Pakistan, always in conflict. So we have an issue. I don't feel they are so benign, because as their leader, Xi Jinping, he makes himself leader for life. I think, oh, alarm bells, really? Why is he doing that? All the leaders who have decided they will be there for the rest of their lives have not done a good job. And that's what's happening in Africa. And then you've got it in Russia and in China. And if Trump did the same, then, you know, what would we all be saying? It would be a bit of a disaster. And that's why I'm so suspicious of China.
Well, I just look at one thing in China, and that is they have delivered on so many fronts. And I have confidence in the type of model that they're following, because, you know, to be able to sort of adopt any other model would make it very, very difficult to make the type of progress that they have done. Like take India, for example. India and China at one time have been compared as being which is the better system, who's going to be ahead and who's not, who's going to fall behind. And the thinking at that time was that India was going to pull ahead and China and leave China behind. But what we found in India is that, you know, that the model doesn't work, you know.
True, but do you then think that their economic success, for their economic success, their politics is worth having?
Well, first of all, my feeling is that people want to have food on the table. It's only secondary concerns like what we have of liberty and free speech that comes next. So what they have delivered is food on the table for 700 to 800 million people. And I think they're making sure that that sort of model also extends to other poor countries as well, so that they have food on the table, you know? And not, like World Bank says, have freedom of democracy, this, that, or the other, freedom. So who wants to have the freedom of speech when I'm going hungry, you know? So
But you want a balance, don't you?
Yeah, naturally. But, you know, in the world that we are, we see that a lot of games get played, and you need to have something strong by way of, you know, a narrative that will work. And that has worked with China.
So, but do you not see any threat in China's politics? I mean, even I accept the economic successes, but the politics frightens me.
Yeah, the politics, I think, is becoming, even being a supporter of China is worrisome because of technology. It's not just China, it's technology all over the world that is going to make for much more surveillance society and possibly less freedom for all of us concerned. So it's not just happening in China. I think it's going to happen everywhere else.
And the other thing is, you know, is we think we have a free society here, you know, but that's an illusion, the same as democracy is an illusion. You've got the most important whistleblower of this century, Julian Assange, rotting away in Belmarsh prison.
Yeah, I think totally unacceptable that.
You know?
Absolutely, yeah. I agree with you.
Man, he told the truth about what was going on, and look what happened to him.
Yeah, that's right. You know, one of the things that we also keep in mind is that this Brexit thing is looming on us after being hit by the pandemic, and the economy is going to go under quite a bit. And the Brexit sort of question is relegated to the backwoods with this sort of, again, the slogan, you know, what is that? No deal, no deal, no deal.
Yeah.
I think that is going to be a double whammy for us in UK, being out of Europe with a no deal, and secondly with the pandemic sort of debt that has been accumulated, and the lack of opportunity for a lot of people resulting from the unemployment and all that. And if we are going to be falling behind in technology by starting off first saying, okay, we don't want Huawei, then we are going to fall back even further on the technological front and the products.
Yeah.
So the government which is not really doing, you know, the people any justice.
No, Shafiq, and I'm with you on that one aspect of it with Brexit. I think, you know, I was reading somewhere the number of people who voted for it out of the population were actually only 37% who voted to leave. You know, many people didn't bother to vote and so on. But we have what we have. But, you know, and they convinced a lot of people that that was the way to do it. But I now find myself thinking that we now have a Brexiteer government, which so far has been really inept at pretty much everything it's done. So how we think that they are going to serve us well after the pandemic and after probably a no-deal Brexit, I have no idea. I think we're going to be so dependent on everyone, so be it the US or China or whatever, or almost be a pawn between China to the extent that it's needed. So if we've got Huawei, we've got China, and we've got America. So at the moment, the Brexiteers think they'll get a deal from Trump. Do they really think they're going to get any favors from Trump? They're dreaming. I think it's their arrogance in a way.
Well, come November, I think at least one thing, I'm pretty certain he's not going to get re-elected. Because
we can only hope.
The polls at the moment are, despite Biden being a very weak opponent, yet he's in the lead by 10 points everywhere.
Yes.
So there's quite a big chance that Trump may not survive another term. In which case, if Biden comes in, as somebody was saying on the radio, there's going to be probably at least some sanity in the White House, and that there will be probably a better dialogue with China, not necessarily, discontinuing the hard line, but at least in a much more effective way, possibly. So there could be, rules that are adopted which are much more acceptable. WTO, I think, probably will be strengthened because, Trump has blocked even WTO. The appellate judges are not appointed because of the objection. So he's dismantled, the multilateral approach and the organizations everywhere. And those people who at least see beyond his rhetoric will see the damage that he has done not only to USA, which people are saying is already in decline, and he's making that decline even faster. So let's hope that period ends in November.
Yes,
Thanks very much. Great discussion. See you all next week.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you very much. Good discussion.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Bye. Take care.